Welcome! In this section we will learn about Django Apps and how we can use them to structure our Django projects. Afterwards we will discuss the main layers of Django, which are views, templates, models and forms. Let's take a look at Django's general architecture. When the user's browser sends an HTTP request to the web server, that request is handled by Django's URL routing mechanism. The URL router then dispatches the request to a view or sometimes to a middleware. The view can then use Django's model layer to query the underlying SQL database. The view can optionally also use templates, forms, or other utilities to help it in generating the correct HTTP response. And then finally, the HTTP response is returned to the client. Welcome to the first video. In this video, we are going to learn about Django Apps and about Django Views, which are Django's way of handling HTTP requests, and also how to map views to URLs and how to pass arguments to views from our URLs. So let's get started. First, make sure that your virtual env is activated by using the source command. You should see that the shell prompt displays the virtual env name. And now it's time for us to create our very first Django app, and we do this by using the command manage.py start app followed by the app name. Since we are going to create an e-learning platform in this screencast, I will use the app name courses. Okay, let's take a look at what that has generated for us. Here's the file system tree. You can see that there are a couple of files in there and a migrations subdirectory. We will take a closer look at these files later and explain what they do in detail. For now, this is all we need. And the next step is to add the app to our settings file. So we open e-learning settings.py in our text editor. There's one setting called installed apps, and we just add courses at the end of the list here. Okay, save the file. And with this, we have just created our very first Django app. Let's talk a little about what apps actually are. Django apps are a way to bundle related functionality together. So in this case, our courses app is supposed to hold all functionality that is related to courses. Apps can be either reusable or project specific. The apps we will write in this tutorial will be project specific, but we will also make use of some third-party apps that are actually reusable. Project specific apps usually live inside your project root directory, as we have seen earlier when we ran the start app command. Reusable apps are typically installed with pip and live inside your virtual env. And another point to remember is that technically an app is just a Python package. Now that we have our first app, of course we want to make it do something actually useful, and to do that we will write our first Django view. Please open the file coursesviews.py in your text editor and replace the default code you see here on the screen. We import the HTTP response class from django.http, and then we write a very small function that takes one argument called request and returns an instance of the HTTP response class, containing in this case the string hello world. A Django view is just a callable, in this case a function, that takes a request as an argument and returns an instance of HTTP response. Of course, over time our views will become a little more complicated, but this one is fine for now. To access our view, of course, we need a URL under which we can access it. So we added the URL conf of our project. To do this, we open the file e-learning urls.py in our text editor. And then please add this line here. We need to import our view. So we add a line saying from courses.views import my first view. And then we add a new entry to the list of the URL patterns. We call the URL function, and then we give it two arguments. The first one is a regular expression that matches against the URL. And the second one is the callable object, so in this case the function myFirstView from the courses.views module. Okay, then save the file and exit, or go to another shell. And if you don't have it running yet, you should now launch the development server using manage.py run server. And as soon as it's running, we go to our web browser and access our project by going to the URL localhost 8000. And as you can see, we see the output of the view we have just written. The two important points to remember here are that Django views are just callable objects that map HTTP requests to HTTP responses, and that URL cons are used to map URLs to views. Now it's time to make our view do something a little bit more interesting. And to do this, we open our URLconf module again and modify the URL pattern at the end of the list to look like this. This is just plain Python regular expression syntax. We have a named group here using the name who, and the actual regular expression pattern is just .star, which matches any sequence of arbitrary characters. And then the pattern is terminated by a slash and a $sign to signify the end of the actual regular expression. Of course, we also need to modify our view to actually accept that argument and do something useful with it. So we open courses views.py and then we modify our view function to look like this. We now accept another argument besides the HTTP requests. It's using the same name we defined in the URLconf module, in this case who, and then we just modify the string that we pass to HTTP response to make use of that parameter. If we now access the project again in our web browser, we will see a 404 error message. This is because we have modified the URL pattern and the new pattern does not match the empty URL anymore. We now need to pass the argument. So for example, we need to use a URL like /world. And as you can see, the view now outputs the argument that it's passed via the URL. So in this video, we have learned about Django Apps, about Django URLs, Django views, and how to map Django URLs to Django views, and how to pass arguments to our views.